FORA.tv. The world is thinking.
Well, very often when you talk about what makes American politics different, people on both sides of the Atlantic will say, well, it's culture. You know, Americans they're undeferential, they're restless, they don't have the class systems and the monarchies that Europe has and so on. But that answer doesn't really take you very far. I mean, culture isn't some numinous entity that exists alongside institutions. It's a product of institutions. There are reasons why there is a Tea Party here and there isn't a Tea Party in Europe. And if you break it down, what's happening in the US that's different? It's the single biggest factor actually is open primaries. There's a Tea Party here because people think that there's a purpose to it. Mm-hmm. My constituents,
what you mean by open primaries?
In most of Europe, in most of the democratic world, in fact everywhere really other than the US, candidates are chosen by their parties and are then presented to the electorate, right. Which means, in effect, that they're chosen by the party leader and his clique. And this allows the political parties to exclude big mainstream currents of public opinion from the legislature. Now, all of the evidence I have is that people in Britain and people in Europe dislike the level of taxation just as much as Americans do. In fact, they've got a lot more to complain about in terms of the overall level of tax. So the reason there is a Tea Party here is not because of some perverse American characteristic of being anti-tax. It's that people think that they can do something about it through the ballot box. And that is an incredibly precious thing you have. Very few of my American friends realize how unusual it is, how unique you are, and how blessed you are in having this system of being able to select your own candidates. Open primaries, referendums, initiative procedures, recall votes, the dispersal of power, states' rights, all of these things are modern incarnations of the old constitutional ideal of the dispersal of power, and it's worked. It's done what it was meant to do. It's done what the founders intended, which is to keep your government small.
So in this country, there are just many more ways in which ordinary citizens just a small group of ordinary citizens can find a place to take a stand and have a voice. Much harder to do in Europe. So the institutions are what impress you most.
Correct. I mean, a classic example in my own country being the issue of the European Union. The overwhelming majority of my constituents would like to leave the European Union. That is not a position publicly shared by any politicians, by any big newspaper, by any main political party. 55% of people...
Even the Telegraph?
Yeah, even the Telegraph. No national newspaper wants to leave the European Union, even though all the readers of all the national newspapers...
Okay, now you're making another point, an additional point. I think it buttresses your argument, but it does seem to me distinct. There's no Fox News. There's no Rush Limbaugh. There's no alternative media. I have discovered only one website in all of Britain that's affiliated with is affiliated loosely with the Tory party that seems to have something of a little bit of a tea flavor. One website, and how many dozens upon dozens of websites do we have here? Now, why is that?
Well, I think there are other websites, actually, and that is making a big difference. I mean, until very recently, there was a kind of media cartel, and you could kill a story just by not reporting it. Not out of conspiracy, but just because you didn't think it was important, because it didn't fit with your worldview. That is less and less true. I mean, the classic recent example being the leak of the University of East Anglia ClimateGate emails. Well, there was a Telegraph blogger called James Dellingpole who carried on harping on and on day after day about this story. And he had this great technique, which is to say, this is what the Times environment correspondent thinks is the top story today. This is what the Independent thinks is the top story. Right. When are they finally going to cover this? And in the end, they had to. Now, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. And, you know, there was the disintermediation of the message, if you like, is, I think, of great value to free marketeers and conservatives generally, because it was by and large the soft left who had and still have the control of the old broadcast media. But it's also just a good thing for the truth. I mean, you know, it's out of this clashing din of competing interpretations that we get the facts.